Eisenman in, scores! What a pretty play to Chris Chelios! Chelios' shot, scores! It may have been tipped in front, but Chris Chelios, the former Blackhawk, let it go!
What if I told you that there was an NHL player who physically couldn't seem to skate as fast as his opponents? From incredible stick checks to his iconic impossible-to-beat positioning, Chris Chelios was truly one of the greatest defensemen in NHL history, and his highlights are honestly some of the best on YouTube. But how did he develop this unique ability that allowed him to play until age 48 and win 3 Stanley Cups? And why did he deliberately choose a style of play that didn't rely on the speed that everyone said was necessary? If you're loving this deep dive into hockey history and want more inspiring stories that celebrate the heart and soul of the game, then smash that like button and subscribe. Join our community of passionate fans. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Well, to find out, we have to go back to 1979. Moose Jaw Canucks of the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League, led by their young defenseman Chris Chelios, were developing a player who would eventually become a legend. But how is it that a kid from Chicago, Illinois, who wasn't even the fastest skater on his high school team, would go on to play 26 seasons in the NHL? Well, Chelios, who grew up in a blue-collar family with his father working as a restaurant owner, had developed into one of the smartest players in junior hockey. The hours he spent watching game film and studying positioning were crucial. You know, I wasn't going to beat anyone in a race, so I had to figure out how to beat them to the spot before they even knew where they were going, and his unique ability to read the game was key. When everybody else is skating around at full speed, I'm thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. I'm not racing to where the puck is. I'm already at where it's going to be. Combined with his incredible toughness and attribute formed during street hockey games in his Chicago neighborhood, Chelios was determined to prove that speed wasn't everything in hockey. As his junior career progressed, the chemistry between Chelios and his defensive style was clear. Not only was he making perfect defensive plays, as well as quarterback-style outlet passes, but he was also developing an edge to his game. The teenager's elite ability to intimidate opponents often meant they were more focused on avoiding his hits than scoring goals. However, despite his defensive skills, major junior teams passed on Chelios because of his skating. This was just the start of his challenges, though, because most college programs didn't even give him a look. After playing at U.S. junior colleges, he finally caught a break when University of Wisconsin coach Bob Johnson saw past his skating limitations. Chelios, realizing that this might be his only shot at a hockey career, made the most of it, developing into a college star despite still being one of the slowest skaters on his team. Yet, a certain NHL scout who begged his team to draft the Wisconsin defenseman had just spotted something special: Bob Pulford of the Montreal Canadiens. Unlike most NHL scouts, who saw red flags while watching Chelios' skating stride, Pulford saw a hockey genius, one that was going to succeed despite his physical limitations. But could a slow-footed defenseman really make it in the much faster NHL game? Before he could answer this question, Chelios was drafted 40th overall in the 1981 NHL entry draft. Yet the Canadiens, not sure if he was ready, suggested he join the U.S. national team. Chelios would then represent the United States at the 1984 Winter Olympics, where his defensive play caught everyone's attention despite his team not medaling. Thanks to this international experience, the now 22-year-old was finally ready for the NHL. But would the Canadiens, a team known for fast, skilled players, really give a chance to someone who couldn't win a fastest skater competition? February 1985, Chris Chelios made his NHL debut with the Montreal Canadiens. While most rookies tried to impress with flashy plays, Chelios immediately showcased his intelligence. His ability to read plays meant he was always in perfect position, making up for his lack of straight-line speed. Chelios would position himself to cut off passing lanes and force opponents to the outside, all while barely appearing to break a sweat. The rookie's calm demeanor resulted in him scoring 64 points and being named to the all-rookie team. But his Canadiens were finally back in the playoffs as contenders. However, their first-round opponent was none other than the defending champion, Edmonton Oilers, a team with the fastest players in hockey, led by Wayne Gretzky and Paul Coffey, a matchup which left everyone, excluding those within Montreal's organization, believing that the series was already over. Or was it? April 1986, Chris Chelios would take the exact advice his coaches had given him all season, positioning himself perfectly to neutralize Edmonton's speed. The rookie defenseman would use his stick and body positioning to slow down the Oilers' attack and help the Canadiens to a shocking upset victory. But this wasn't all. Because in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Calgary Flames, fueled by his growing confidence, Chelios would outplay everyone. Chelios would make what would be the greatest defensive series of his young career, shutting down Calgary's top scorers while contributing offensively as well. Stunned by just how well this rookie was playing, the Flames struggled to generate offense, resulting in Montreal winning the Stanley Cup. Chelios had proven that speed wasn't everything in hockey. However, as his time in Montreal continued, a flaw in Chelios' game began to emerge. His temper and aggressive style often led to penalties, a blemish in his game that resulted in criticism from coaches and media. While Chelios had found ways to make up for his lack of skating speed, his inability to control his emotions was becoming a liability. The defenseman was devastated, vowing to solve his weakness and lead his team back to glory. Because if he couldn't, Montreal would likely be sending their star defenseman somewhere else. February 1990, Chelios was set to appear in his third All-Star game, representing the Montreal Canadiens. I'm saying about Chris Chelios, your fellow NHL All-Star Ray Bourque says, if you think he's effective in games, you should see him in practice. His positioning is perfect every single time. What can we expect from you today? I don't know, I'm not going to be the fastest guy out there, but I'll be in the right spot. Just watch how I shut down those fancy forwards. Chelios would then truly show not just the fans in the arena, but hockey players across the whole world, how positioning and hockey IQ could overcome any lack of skating speed. You're going to take the puck? Chelios had perfected the art of the subtle interference, the perfect stick lift, and the angled body check. Tricks that I know for a fact we've all tried at least once, including me, in a pickup game. And it was these plays the defenseman made that began to draw comparisons to other NHL legends. People like Bobby Orr have said that you're one of the smartest players he's ever seen. You've been compared to Larry Robinson. How does that feel? I mean, it feels good to be compared to great players like Robinson, and coming from such a great person like Bobby Orr makes me feel good, but still, I have a long way to go. I'm still young. As the 1989 to 1990 season continued, Chelios' defensive form only grew stronger. Not only did he record night after night of shutting down the opponent's top lines, but against the Boston Bruins, the Chicago native would completely neutralize Cam Neely, one of the league's most dangerous scorers. Thanks to the intelligence and positioning of Chelios, Montreal was once again set to enter the playoffs as contenders. However, awaiting them was the rising Boston Bruins, a team who had finished first in their division. Thanks to Boston's potent offense, no one had picked the Canadiens to even win a single game. Yet Montreal had other plans. May 1990, Montreal, after falling behind early in the series, found themselves in a do-or-die Game 6. But would Chelios be able to lead his team to victory? Well, Ray Bourque, the Bruins' superstar defenseman, would go out and not only score key goals, but also play strong defense. Bourque's insane individual play, a performance that no one, not even Chelios, could match, would result in the Canadiens once again being sent home, just a win away from advancing. Chelios would sit in his locker and reflect, understanding that in order for his team to succeed, he would have to develop not only his defensive positioning, but also his ability to contribute offensively. Therefore, the defenseman would spend hours watching film of the game's greatest offensive defenseman, trying to understand how he could better lead his Canadiens to their one true goal, another Stanley Cup championship. However, before he could help Montreal return to glory, the unthinkable happened. On June 29, 1990, Chris Chelios was traded to the Chicago Blackhawks for Dennis Savard. The hockey world was shocked. How could Montreal trade away their Norris Trophy-winning defenseman? Chelios had just won the award as the NHL's best defenseman despite being one of its slowest skaters. While most would be upset and hold resentment towards their team for trading them, Chelios didn't. It sucked at first, because I didn't really want to leave Montreal, but going to Chicago, my hometown, was special. The fans there didn't care if I wasn't the fastest. They appreciated how I played the game. Chelios tried to see the positives in being moved to a new franchise, and on October 4th, 1990, Chris, wearing his hometown team's jersey, would showcase his true potential. In a game against the New York Rangers, it wasn't Chelios' defensive positioning that was on display. No, it was something else. The now ex-Canadian would deliver bone-crushing hits, make perfect outlet passes, and even score, showing just how important he was for Chicago. However, Chelios' individual performances were just about the only positive for the Blackhawks early in the season. Chicago struggled to find their identity. Something had to change, and quick. January 1991. The Blackhawks had a new head coach in Mike Keenan, and Chelios had been named an alternate captain. The gritty defenseman knew his role was to set the tone for the team physically while providing steady defensive play. Chelios enjoyed that his new coach actually held not only himself, but their whole squad accountable. Chicago, thanks to another Keenan idea, challenging his players publicly and creating a sense of accountability, began to develop an identity as the toughest team in the NHL. But Keenan wasn't done. He would build his team around Chelios' strengths, emphasizing defensive responsibility and physical play over pure speed. This approach perfectly suited the defenseman's style. While Chicago still had doubters, the 1991 to 1992 season made it clear that the Blackhawks, built around a slow defenseman, were destined for greatness. And the front office wasn't done making moves. Jeremy Roenick was emerging as a star center, and together with Chelios, they formed the core of a team that was ready to compete for the Stanley Cup despite not being the fastest team in the league. Now, Chelios not only had a solid team in front of him, but also the perfect system to showcase his unique abilities, a style that Chelios would highlight as his biggest transformation. As the 1991 to 1992 season pressed on, Chelios would continue to be a defensive force, while also showcasing just how much he had grown as a leader. He literally changed our team, teammate Steve Larmer recalled. He said, "It doesn't matter if we're not the fastest team. If we're the hardest working and smartest team, no one can beat us." I'm thinking to myself, how does someone so supposedly limited in skating make such an impact? But he proved it every night. Chris Chelios was now able to control games from the blue line despite his lack of foot speed, allowing Chicago, for the first time with him on the roster, to reach the Stanley Cup Finals. Not only had they set a new standard, but the Blackhawks would defeat the Edmonton Oilers along the way, with Chelios completely shutting down their speed game. And they weren't done yet, because Chelios was named a finalist for the Norris Trophy once again, recognition that his unique style of defense was working at the highest level. Not only was their mentor recognized as one of the top defensemen in the league, but Chicago, thanks to the guidance of their star player, had won an impressive number of games, allowing the franchise to reach the finals for the first time since 1973. However, their opponent in the finals was the defending 1991 Stanley Cup champions, the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins, led by their dynamic duo of Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr, would dismantle the tough Blackhawks, exploiting gaps in their defense and beating them with pure skill. It took Pittsburgh a mere 4 games to send Chelios and his team home empty-handed. But Chicago was still proud. Not only had they finally returned to the Stanley Cup Finals, but they had built a team around a defenseman, who everyone said was too slow to succeed in the modern NHL. Or had they? Throughout the next several seasons, Chicago would remain competitive, but never quite return to the finals. Chelios continued to play at an elite level, winning 2 more Norris trophies in 1993 and 1996, proving that his intelligent positional style of defense was still effective even as the NHL got faster. However, by 1999, as Chicago entered a rebuilding phase, it became clear that Chelios' time with the Blackhawks was ending. But where would they send their aging defensemen? Detroit, Michigan. Chris Chelios was relaxing during a day off when, all of a sudden, his phone rang. He had been traded to the Detroit Red Wings, Chicago's bitter rivals. At age 37, most defensemen were retiring or significantly declining, especially those with Chelios' lack of foot speed. Yet, Detroit's general manager Ken Holland saw something others missed. He asked Chelios if he thought he could still play at a high level. "For sure, I'm not finished. You know what? I'll play until they rip this jersey off my back." March 23rd, 1999. The largest rival-to-rival trade in recent NHL history had just gone down. Chris Chelios, who had embodied the Blackhawks' identity for nearly a decade, had been traded to the Detroit Red Wings for the 1999 to 2000 season. But fitting in with the Red Wings wasn't easy. Detroit played a completely different style than Chicago, one based on puck possession and skill rather than physicality. Many wondered if the aging, slow-footed defenseman could adapt. Red Wings head coach Scotty Bowman knew something had to change. He never lost his tactical genius, and apparently, Scotty Bowman never lost the ability to get the most from his players. The legendary coach sat down with Chelios and clearly outlined what was expected of him. Chelios' sole focus was to be a shutdown defender, and any offensive contributions would be a bonus, a sacrifice Chelios was happy to make in order to achieve his one true goal: another Stanley Cup. Thanks to the backing from all the superstars on their roster, Detroit ended their 2001 to 2002 campaign as President's Trophy winners, with the league's best record. Despite some challenges in the early playoff rounds, the Red Wings had found themselves back in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Carolina Hurricanes. On June 13, 2002, while it was Detroit who was just a single win away from the Cup, it was Carolina who had won Game 3 to get back in the series. The Hurricanes were younger and faster than the aging Red Wings, and many thought Detroit's older players, especially the slow Chelios, would wear down as the series progressed. However, Chris Chelios, knowing just how important this game was for his squad, would go out and deliver a defensive masterclass. The 40-year-old would expertly cut off passing lanes, clear the front of the net, and make perfect first passes to start the transition game. The veteran's insane defensive effort ignited the Red Wings to victory and helped them clinch the Stanley Cup in Game 5. But could they really win another championship with such an aging roster? On June 9th, 2008, Detroit, thanks to the incredible play of their younger stars like Henrik Zetterberg and Pavel Datsyuk, had arrived at a chance to win another Stanley Cup, this time against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yet Chris Chelios, now 46 years old and the oldest player in the NHL, would say something that shocked everyone. Age is just a number. I feel like I can still contribute to this team and help them win. The day I can't keep up is the day I'll retire. But that day isn't today. Detroit would go on to win the 2008 Stanley Cup, with Chelios becoming the second oldest player ever to win the Cup. Despite playing a reduced role, his leadership and defensive acumen were still valuable. Chelios had proven that with enough hockey intelligence and proper positioning, even the slowest skater could still be effective at the highest level of hockey. However, as the 2008 to 2009 season progressed, Chelios' minutes began to decrease. The defenseman, who had found ways to make up for his lack of speed for decades, was finally facing the ultimate opponent, time itself. After Detroit lost in the 2009 Stanley Cup Finals in a rematch against Pittsburgh, the Red Wings decided not to re-sign the 47-year-old defenseman. Not ready to retire, Chelios signed with the Chicago Wolves of the American Hockey League, hoping to prove he could still play at age 48. His determination paid off when the Atlanta Thrashers signed him for the final 7 games of the 2009 to 2010 season, making him one of the oldest players ever to play in the NHL. But after those games, Chris Chelios would officially retire from professional hockey. And this time, it wasn't just because he was too slow. Chris Chelios was truly one of the greatest defensemen to ever step foot onto NHL ice. Watching Chelios, especially in his prime with Montreal and Chicago, it almost seemed like his lack of speed didn't matter at all. And while part of his success was due to his incredible toughness, the real truth is that the positioning he used was simply a more efficient way of playing defense. By using perfect angles, anticipation, and a relentless work ethic, he was able to shut down opponents more effectively than if he were to rely on pure speed. Whilst Chelios eventually had to adapt his game as he aged into his 40s, his intelligence and positioning would always appear in every game, turning him into a fan favorite for people all over the world and earning him induction into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2013. By the way, let me know what you think below. Does Chris Chelios deserve a spot in the top 10 defensemen of all time? Regardless if you think yes or no, please share your thoughts below. I would love to hear them. Did Chelios' journey ignite something within you? That fire to defy limitations, to win against the odds? We're on a quest to reach 10,000 fellow hockey enthusiasts who believe in the heart of the game. Join us. Smash that like button if you felt inspired, and subscribe to become part of our growing community. Let's keep these powerful stories alive, together. Your support makes all the difference.